Okay, hello everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Welcome to this Great British Entrepreneur Awards webinar on a very timely topic of how small businesses can mitigate the threat of coronavirus. I'm sure everyone on the webinar is aware of the growing situation both around the world and here in the UK, but we just wanted to give you a quick rundown of why we're running this webinar and what is going on. So at the start of the week, the government saw no reason to move to the delay phase of the process from the containment phase. It does obviously acknowledge that that the virus is likely to spread in a significant way in the next few weeks, and the chief medical officer has said that many thousands of people are likely to contract the virus. Particularly, the reason that we have decided to run this webinar is that a lot of forecasts have suggested that the impact of the virus is likely to cause the slowest global economic growth since the financial crisis in 2008. And obviously, we've seen so much news and speculation that small businesses, in particular, are going to be really affected, with things such as 1 in 5 workers being off sick in the worst case scenario, and smaller cash reserves for smaller businesses, making them less resistant to serious disruption. And as you can see on the slide there, that more than half of SMEs expect revenue to drop in the next quarter, and 50% say that they're not likely to actually invest at all. So on to the insight and advice. Today we're joined by 4 industry experts who will be providing insight on how the spread of coronavirus, is likely to affect their specific areas, and offer some advice on measures and steps that you can put in place to ensure that the impact on your business is minimal. So our speakers today are Matthew Wardner, who is a business continuity expert, and the managing director of Inveroy Crisis Management. He'll be given an overview on how to address a crisis and how best to prepare. We've also got Simon Curitan, who's the Chief Executive of Funding Options, the marketplace for business, and he'll be talking about cash flow and finance options. Then we've got Tracy Hudson, Executive Director of the HR department, who will be discussing staff issues that arise from the crisis. And finally, we've got Evadne Campbell, MBE, founder of Shiloh PR, and Evadne will be talking to us about how to communicate internally and externally in situations like this. Just a bit of housekeeping to let you know how this is going to work. So every speaker is going to have around 10 to 15 minutes to deliver their talk, and at the end we will ask them any questions that appear. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, leave them in the chat function on your screen, and I will do my best to fit them in, although I imagine that it's such a big topic at the moment with so many questions that we'll probably struggle to get through to them. But we've included some contact information for each speaker, so you can get in touch afterwards. And there will also be a recording of the webinar sent to everyone if you do need to catch up and go over things again. So you'll be pleased to hear that is all from me for now. I will pass you on to our first speaker, business continuity expert, Matthew Wardner.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I hope that you can all hear me and that I can impart some ideas for you over the next 10 minutes or so. Given that it is only 10 minutes, I will try and get you to the stage that you are thinking, what if? And if we can get to that point and then you're able to start to fill in the blanks for your specific details, your specific company, then I think we're in a good place. So if you'll forgive me, I will rattle on. By way of background, preparation is key to everything, and since I've written these slides a couple of days ago, time has already moved on rapidly, and I hope that a lot of what you now see on this slide is a statement of the obvious. But for example, where we say office cleaning, you may in your office talk about the idea of a clear desk policy, but all too often many of us forget that and leave something on the desk, which if you are then the cleaner coming in to clean the offices overnight, you are doing a less good job because cleaners tend not to be allowed to move anything that's on the desk. So it's the little things of making it easy for your team, your staff to do what you want them to do. I was fortunate to be at the Rugby International at the weekend, and for the first time ever, there was a queue at for the hand washing facilities in the gents. Well, let's make sure that there are enough hand towels and there are enough liquid soap and so on, so that the measures you ask your team to do, they can actually do. Secondly, the idea of reassuring your customers. When this is over, you want your customers to look at you and go, do you know what? You did a great service. So that opportunity, if they are someone that provides 20% of your turnover, dropping them an email saying, I know we're going to be going through a turbulent time. Trust us, we're on this, and we will make sure that we can continue to give the best possible service that we can. Will be reassuring to them, provided it's true, obviously. Monitoring your morale of your staff. They will be going through a turbulent time at the moment, and setting up those ways of communicating with them early, whether it be a WhatsApp group, whether it be something more sophisticated like an intranet site, will just allow them to reach out for the facts from you before the incident occurs, to make sure that they know what do you expect from them. And also, if you do get to the stage that you're working from home, you've tested the system before it is tested under stress environments. The final couple of points there, we all will have staff that have children of school age. Some are used to working at home, Easter holidays, summer holidays, etc. Some aren't. But we should expect the fact that productivity is likely to be worse when we're in that situation, just because they're screaming, Dad, can we go and play football, instead of you delivering your work. So a few pointers there for preparation. The Business Continuity Institute looks at 4 key types of disruptive event. Typically, anything that we find in a disruptive nature will fit into one of these. So for example, if you can't get into your building, it doesn't matter whether it's caused by snow, protesters, a fire, a utilities problem. The impact is that you can no longer do what you were trying to do before in that building. And so what I'm going to do now is look at these 4 different scenarios and some of the ideas of how we can overcome this. Normally, you might do your preparation for one of these incidents at a time. The challenge with coronavirus or COVID-19 is that all 4 potentially will impact at the same time, which just creates that little bit more of a stressful environment. So what could cause you to have a denial of your building? Well, it could be because you've been ordered not to go in, either by the government or by the building owner, or that it's just in deep clean and you've decided that you're going to take a day as a precautionary measure to lock it down and allow that deep clean. As I say, it doesn't matter what the cause is, it's the impact that is important. If you have done any of this planning before, you may have looked at, oh, it's okay, we can go and use what they typically call a work area recovery site. Examples, Regis, SunGuard, and so on. Or it may be that you just decided, oh, we'll go and we'll meet in Starbucks or Costa or whatever, and we can work from there to have a quick team meeting and then go home. Remember, they are unlikely to want you to come into their office if there's a risk that you or a colleague could be infected. Therefore, working from home is probably that solution that we need to focus on most. And therefore, at this stage, if your people are able to deliver the product that you do from a remote location, i.e. from home, can we get them to the stage where they can actually do it? Do they have sufficient Wi-Fi strength? Have they thought about what they're going to do over the Easter holidays? What if schools are closed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And we work with one company that yesterday put in an order for 600 additional laptops, so that people who traditionally would work in the office and say, oh, I've only got an iPad at home, how are you going to work from an iPad for 2 weeks or 2 months? Well, okay, invest now to enable those things to keep going, because it could happen. And then it's your risk management on how good or how bad that might be. So denial of building. Second category is loss of personnel. And again, it could be that a member of your staff has the infection. It could be that they fear picking up the infection. For example, that they've got an elderly relative that they don't want to then go and, that they are caring for, and they don't want to risk picking up the infection and then being unable to care for that relative. Or it could just be that one of your contractors says, do you know what, we aren't going to come into your office anymore because we are limiting our own travel, and therefore that has an impact on you. So it's all of those areas of loss of personnel. Firstly, follow the government advice. We all think we're jolly clever, obviously, but the Chief Scientific Officer is probably more on top of this than any of us and will give you the facts rather than following social media and rumour control. From my simple analysis at the moment, of all those who are tested, approximately 1 or 2% are testing positive. So if you do have a case where someone in an office is tested and you're waiting the result, those symptoms that look like flu could just be flu. So it is that risk balance that you take as the employer on at what stage do you say, okay, everyone work from home or not. If you bear in mind that a member of the Scottish female rugby team a couple of weeks ago was diagnosed with coronavirus, how many people did they put into isolation? Only 8. Well, a full rugby squad with management and so on clearly is much more personal contact than the average person in the office. So it's not guaranteed that everyone has it. But how can we manage that? Well, simple things: reduce travel, reduce mass events, which is Irish government have just announced that. Do you really need to go to that conference? Can you have that meeting? I know we all like to look at our customers across the table and do our sales pitches face to face, but can you do it responsibly over a different method? When it comes to your own team, if you've got 2 people that have the same skill set, traditionally we put them on the same desk cluster because that's the best way to improve productivity. However, if they're now on the same desk cluster, if one of them gets it, then you've lost the other one as well. So some companies are talking about red team and blue team, initially separating them out so they move to more than 2 meters apart, ideally separate desk clusters or even separate floors. Some have moved to the idea of the red team stays at home, the blue team comes into work, and you do week on, week off, or week turning around. The critical thing that we're looking at doing is maintaining your cash flow. And so you are prioritizing your staff to those areas that generate your cash. So if there is something that you don't need to do, for example, staff personnel reporting mechanism for bonuses or something, or a training activity that can be delayed, work out that isn't a priority, but I can use that person, I can cross-train them, and I can get them to help on the answering the phone because the internet may be down, getting into the stock room and getting stock moving. Whatever it is that generates your income, focus on that with those staff that you've got who are available. Third, loss of technology. We would hope at the moment that our technology is robust and will allow us to work from home. But in extremis, are there manual workarounds? Can the customer reach you? Is your phone number available? Is it obvious so that if there is a problem or a glitch, you can actually speak to them and reassure them that you will get it sorted? When we say that working from home, your IT department or the third-party contractor that does it for you will also be potentially working from home. And your help desk may not be as robust as it would be under normal circumstances. Can you still get hold of them? And if you can't, can you spend some time now to train your staff so that they know how to log on to the conference call, they know how to do a Teams or a Skype or a Zoom or whatever it is that you use meeting, rather than they get home and then they need to ring someone to work out how to do it and that person isn't available. I've heard some discussion about, the world is trying to do this at the same time and therefore video conferences may not be available when you want them. If that happens, we can always go back to telephone conference calls that 5 years ago. But I was reassured by someone the other day that the average evening picks up with everyone streaming Netflix and so on. So actually, during the normal working day, the average broadband is able to cope with the sort of imposition that they're going to get. But be prepared. As I said at the start, it's the what if scenario. What if it fails? How do I do that? What technology is critical? My final slide is on supply chain. And we're all very keen on the idea of just-in-time logistics once upon a time. So we didn't have big warehouses of stock, and we've all therefore reduced it to the minimum. And for some items, stationery, typically you can call into a shop and buy your stationery very easily. Other items that you need will be challenged. And your supplier is now also potentially challenged with exactly the same issues that you've got. And I mentioned the idea of one of our companies ordering 600 laptops. That's just at the time where the spare parts that make laptops are not being produced in China, South Korea, etc. So what is it that is absolutely essential for you to deliver your output? Where do you get it from? And if you can answer that with a backup, then we're in a good place. That what if the primary supplier we use cannot supply us anymore? Where can I get my X from, those widgets? And finding that backup supplier now and going through the paperwork of setting up purchase orders and so on, just in case, is something for all of us to consider. Is it worth the effort? How long is it going to go on for, etc.? My final bullet point there is the idea that if you have many items in your product range and some are more popular or more profitable than others, in this time that where to keep companies going, cash flow is going to become important. Do you or have you got the capacity to focus on those products that are going to earn you the most money and keep you afloat at the price of saying, actually, I need the spares for these or the component parts for this item. I'm going to sacrifice and I'm not going to do items C and D. I'm only going to focus on A and B. Strategic decisions, you may disappoint some of your other customers, but at least in a couple of months' time, you will still be afloat to go back and fight for those new orders. That's it from me, Jonathan. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Matthew. That was a fantastic start. So I'll actually start with a question from myself. It's essentially I know someone who is self-employed. They own a gym. But it is affiliated to a central business. Now, advice across the board, across Europe, is to, particularly in places like Italy, is to go to places, not go to places like a gym to avoid increasing the outbreak naturally. Now, this individual runs seminars and courses and things on the weekend. And there's a course in Madrid this weekend that an individual was supposed to take who lives in Italy, so obviously can't attend. And the person that I know has been told that he needs to go to Madrid, where there are a lot of cases. Where does he stand in terms of being self-employed and having his own business to run and ensure that it carries on, whilst being affiliated to the central company and what they want to do?
I think he needs to check the small print, probably. The ultimate challenge there is it wise that he risks his health to go to somewhere, or risk then being quarantined when he comes back? And as soon as his other customers know that he's traveled there, will they want to come in, etc. I would be lobbying quite hard if I was him to say, do I really need to go there at the time when we're being told to reduce travel, etc.? I would suggest that is as it's a training course, one of those things that he pushes hard to seek a delay of 3 to 6 months, because it's not going to help his business if people to launch a new capability or a new product range when there's no one going to turn up to do it. Just like the James Bond film, etc., being delayed. Wouldn't it be better to launch that capability at the time when people are going to go, do you know what, I'm fed up with being in home, I want to get to the gym, i.e. in 3 months' time. So I think the small print, speaking to the managers and just trying to get to that stage of where does common sense lie, would be my suggestion.
Okay, excellent. We've got a couple of questions in the chat as well. So this one is from Chloe, and she asks, how important is it that businesses reassess their whole business model and strategy? I'm thinking particularly perhaps in the case of events. If their entire revenue stream is based on events, that's going to fall over the next few months. How important is it that they act now to reassess things?
I think now is quite a good time to reassess, is this going to work? But I wouldn't suggest that your business model needs to do a 180-degree turn, because we all hope that this will calm down in 2 to 3 months' time. And if you've done a handbrake turn just because of this one event, have you jeopardized the future and so on? But it may be a chance to say, do we always need to do it the way that we've done it? For example, especially with all the focus on climate change and reducing travel, if we've suddenly got to the stage that we're all actually much more comfortable working with video conferencing and that becomes part of a new normal, well, hallelujah, we don't need to go on flights to go and meet our customers quite so much because they are comfortable with us not doing it. So there is a balance to be struck there on how you deliver your capability. And I'm minded, just-in-time logistics is an example of that, we've all got used to the global world, etc. And then suddenly we go, hang on a second, but that does have vulnerabilities. This is a unique situation that we all hope will never happen again, but it is worth just reflecting on where are we and what can we do perhaps.
Okay, brilliant. I think we're probably going to have to move on to our next speaker. So we'll say thank you very much, Matthew, for your contributions today.
Okay, my pleasure.
So up next, we've got Simon Curitan, who is the Chief Executive of Funding Options, the marketplace for business finance. I won't step on your toes too much at all, Simon, so over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you for your time. So I'm ever the optimist, and I think you will all be, I'm sure, very close to the developments that have been announced over the last couple of days by both the Bank of England and the government. So I will take you through some of the new developments that have been announced, and I'll also talk to you obviously about funding options and what we can do for you at this time of relative crisis. So I am, as John says, the CEO of Funding Options. We are Europe's leading marketplace for SME lending. We deal with 200 plus lender partners across both alternative lenders, the big banks, challenger banks, neobanks. Pretty much any lender of this worth their salt is one of our partners. So let's just start by taking a step back and looking at what the implications are of the current situation. So obviously we have had up until now just the dreaded B word, Brexit, causing issues for the whole UK economy. And now obviously that's joined by COVID-19. So the impacts of this, quite simply, revenues decreasing for SMEs across the UK. So, where an SME is dealing with suppliers or people who are purchasing goods from the UK from abroad in Europe, for example, that could hit that could hit your revenues quite significantly. Working capital as well. So from a working capital perspective, if your revenues do decrease and you have to spend hard-earned cash just to stay alive, obviously you can deplete your resources from a working capital perspective. And then there's also a shift from long-term planning to short-term focus. So any scenario, emergency scenario such as this, causes, unfortunately, distraction, and the best laid plans, unfortunately, are laid bare quite often. So what's the government's response been? Sorry, apologies. Okay, so the government's response, somebody's changed my presentation in front of me. So I think it's important to set this out before we go into what funding options can do. So the UK government and the Bank of England have responded very, very quickly to the current scenario. Probably the most important development is an announcement of the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. This is something that the government will be working with the British Business Bank on, And essentially it's the making available of up to £1 billion worth of funds to lend to UK SMEs. And the government will guarantee bank loans to SMEs for amounts up to £1.2 million in terms of borrowing. And the government will also guarantee losses up to 80% of that loan value. So effectively, they are incentivizing the banks to open up their coffers and be more flexible in terms of what they will lend to SMEs, which is going to be incredibly important at this time. There's also £130 million worth of new funding, which will go into the BBB specifically for startup companies. So their startup loans initiative, again, incredibly important for the UK economy. And there will be £5 billion worth of new export loans for businesses, which is again going to be absolutely vital. And then there's £200 million further to invest in scale-ups. So again, that money goes to the BBB to invest in scale-up companies across the UK. There have also been announcements around business rates being abolished for the whole of 2020 for companies with a rateable value of up to 51k, and also tax payments being deferred. So instead of having the pressure of having to settle tax payments right now, some of those can actually be deferred for a period of time, which at the moment is as yet undefined. In terms of the Bank of England, you will, I'm sure, be aware that they have cut their interest rates by 0.5%, so a full 0.5% cut immediately, bringing the rate down to, I think, the record low of 0.25%. And what the B of E is committed to do is, again, make available cheap funds to banks, which, again, will allow them to hopefully bolster what is becoming available to the market. Just taking a step back into funding options. So what do? So we have access to effectively all of market. So we deal with loans from £1,000 up to multi-millions. We cover all products. The ones that are listed here on the presentation are those that are most applicable to working capital borrowing and cash flow borrowing. Revolving credit facility. This is quite simply an unsecured liquidity financing solution, which allows the borrower to have a rolling credit agreement rather than a fixed loan. The benefits of this are that you can use as much or as little of that facility as you like, and you will only pay interest on the amount of funds that you use. If you look at longer term versus shorter term funding, longer term funding is more beneficial in that from a value perspective, the level of monthly repayments is going to be lower than you would have if you undertook shorter term borrowing. And you can obviously delay how long you would repay the principal. So what we would recommend at Funding Options is, to the greatest extent a business can, the business is prepared in advance as best it can to cater for the impacts that it think it will have over the coming months. MCA, or merchant cash advance, is another product which actually isn't particularly well known in the market, but where a business has access to regular transaction flow, and for example, they may use a payments terminal, there are lenders out there that will lend against that transaction flow. It's considered an asset, if you like, for lenders, and businesses can access funds very quickly using this kind of a facility. So that's merchant cash advance. Again, the overriding point is around preparation. Our recommendation is that businesses do look at their books closely. They do understand, to the best of their capability, the onward impact on cash flow. And if necessary, simply give somebody like us a call. The market is very difficult to navigate. There's hundreds of lenders out there. It's very fragmented. Somebody like Funding Options or our peers in the market can actually signpost the best solutions for you, and we can discuss the various options that would be available to all sorts of businesses, both large and small. This is just a summary slide here. So again, in terms of our lender partners, 200 plus, we deal with small to very, very large loans over different terms. And we obviously do short-term and long-term borrowing. We've already talked about all of the types of lender partners that we have. We have a very large specialist sales team. So we have up to 40 salespeople who are online, ready to talk to businesses at any stage. And they're all experts in all of the different types of products that the market has to offer. And we would welcome the opportunity to talk to anybody who has any questions at all or an immediate need, of course. I think it's about time we turned over to Q&A, John.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Simon. So, yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat. So Mike says that he has just been notified of an Innovate UK grant approval, but the business needs to match funding of 120,000. He says that getting investors to commit is terrible. Is a loan an option? And if so, how might he go about it?
That's a very, very good question from Mike. So yes, potentially a loan is an option to match fund, if you like, against that grant. That is something that we could look closely at. Off the top of my head, I couldn't immediately state that there would be X number of lenders that will be able to jump on that immediately. But the fact that the grant is there and obtainable means that I think a conversation can absolutely be had. The challenge that businesses have, and something like this, which is fantastic to have a grant accessible of that nature, the challenge is there are always nuances to all of the offers that people have out there in the market. Equally, with what the government and the Bank of England have put forward, it's not clear, 100% clear right now exactly how they will be administered and what the terms are. What we would like to see is actually closer cooperation, for example, with the governing bodies, the government, etc., with people like us, so that we can steer them to deliver a solution that would actually be able to be applied to the whole of market without exceptions. So people in the more difficult sectors, such as travel, hospitality, etc., we know that there are some lenders who have automatically, or already, I should say, they're looking not to lend proactively into those areas. But for us, the funds that are being made available should be put behind those sectors. And actually, that's probably what we'll see some of the banks do. And we're in discussions with those banks about that right now. So yes, I do think it's possible, Mike.
Okay, brilliant, Simon. And we've got another one from Joseph, who asks, how easily and quickly accessible are government grants and loans?
So given that the announcement was only yesterday, again, we don't have 100% clarity, but what we're hearing right now, feedback from contacts across the industry, is that certainly the banks are going to be immediately responsive to businesses in need. Again, we've seen historically that banks haven't been necessarily the optimum lender for small businesses, obviously sort of cherry picking the better quality ones as they would see it. What we hope to see is that the banks have a bit more of a fair sort of approach to the applications they're going to receive, and equally we can approach the banks on the behalf of businesses as well.
Now, as I was just saying, I'm going to run through this quite quickly because I know time is really against us. And also Matthew mentioned a number of the things that I was going to talk about. So if we move to the first slide, then let's see if I can handle. Okay. What I would say in terms of communication, and I'm going to focus on how you communicate internally with your staff and with visitors coming in onto the premises, and also your external stakeholders or anyone who, customers, suppliers, etc. The first thing I would suggest you do is set up what I'm kind of tentatively calling an information hub. And it's really just another part of your site maybe where you will focus on communicating about what the company is doing in relation to handling the coronavirus crisis. Now, that needs to be very, very regularly. And we talk about the use of social media and all those other means of communications that we have. But as Matthew has mentioned, whilst we're relying on the World Wide Web and so on, there could be a time when that does not become as useful and as reliable as we're used to. But if you have got your social media platform set up, then I would say you're keeping those up to date regularly throughout the day with any information that you want your staff to be aware of. You really have to make sure your staff internally know what decisions the company is taking, what procedures the company has implemented, what policies you're setting up, because they're going to be your spokespeople. They're going to be your ambassadors. So I would say really make sure that they know what is going on, because they will also be the first port of call from your customers and from your stakeholders. Put the 140, 200 update, instant update on what's going on your social media, but then make sure that there are more detailed information on your information hub. So everything should be driving people back to your information hub, so that therefore everyone will know that A, you're communicating well with all those people that are likely to be affected by what is going on. I think the most challenging thing for any organization is the fact that this is a fast-paced, fast-moving crisis, and to keep up to date and to make sure that people know that you are the front of knowledge of what is happening within your own company, and therefore what needs to be done. That's I would say using the information hub and using your social media platform is the best way. Next is the internal communication with staff, anyone coming on site, i.e. your visitors that are coming in on site. If we could have the next slide, which is very much about, Matthew talked about your need for hand sanitizers. Now, that's one thing that is being drummed into all of us. But despite the fact that it is being drummed into all of us, I don't think currently companies either aren't conscious of where they ought to be placing these hand sanitizers or how important these things are. I work at a university, and I know for a fact I was there on Tuesday, and the only place there were hand sanitizers throughout the building that I could spot was on the reception, and the reception was in another block. Now, when I asked the students, they weren't aware. So prominent notices around the building so that anyone who comes into your offices and into your building know that you are taking this seriously, even if generally people would know what to do. Just add more notices, because it then makes people, your visitors, your staff, get more confident that you are taking this matter seriously. And it's simply one-page notice saying where people can find sanitizers, the fact that you're encouraging everyone who enters that building to be more conscious about cleanliness, washing their hands, and so on. And also something as simple as the 20-second rule to wash hands. I know we've heard it over and over and over again. However, don't just assume that people know. Reinforce it. I would say the other thing you need to develop now are clear guidelines for all staff who may have gone on holiday, who may have visited family abroad. What is the company's policy on returning back to work? I know for a fact of one company this week that had a member of staff returned back from Italy, and because they had said initially that if there were no issues, staff could come into work if they weren't suffering from any symptoms. What then happened is the staff that are currently in the office, knowing that that member of staff had gone on holiday, became uncomfortable with them being in the office. So that staff a day later was told to self-isolate. Now, if there was a clear policy on saying when you return from hotspots, irrespective of whether you have symptoms or not, this is what you need to do. So have those things available now. Laptops, Matthew mentioned, some companies are ordering more laptops because they're now going to be asking their staff to work from home. So wherever possible, encourage staff to take their laptops home at night, just in case the advice changes overnight and they're asked, we are in lockdown and you can't come in, they'll already be prepared. But one thing that I would say at this stage, before you get to that stage, do test runs. If people are taking laptops home, make sure they check that they're able to access the company site. Make sure they know that they can access, you may have internet that allows you to have team meetings. If you don't, download those so you can communicate. And already, I would say if you have staff that are vulnerable because of previous illnesses or who are asthmatic, tell them now what are the policies. Should you be working from home for your own comfort and for your own kind of to reinforce that the company does not want to put them at risk, but make sure that they know and keep all of this information updated on your information hub and make sure that you're telling the staff that's where they go for the latest information on what the company is doing. Once your customers also know that if I need to know what's happening at that site, will my product be delivered because I've heard that they're not coming into work, where do I go for the latest information? Keep making sure that you keep your customers, your staff, your visitors, your stakeholders informed, and the best place to get that information is internally at your own information hub. And try and keep it separate from your website because all you want on that hub is anything to do with this current crisis. You may keep it up for later on, but at the moment, you really don't want it to get bogged down with other information because you really want people to see it as that's the place. The other thing I said is diversity in communications. And the reason why I've suggested that, diversity, is that we have to understand that different people accept their communications in different formats. So use different formats to communicate the same message, reinforcing it over and over again. Vary your communications as you do now because, as we all know, different social media platforms are talking to different audiences, and therefore the communications tool that you use for Instagram will not necessarily be the same tool you use on Facebook or on Twitter. Think about it. Think about whether you need to be putting up little short videos or more detailed videos on your website that not only has the same information that you've written in a post, but that you have decided to put up as a content that people can listen and watch. Watch a video. I'd much rather watch a video giving me instructions than sitting there reading pages and pages of instruction. So use as many different forms to communicate that same information. Keep reinforcing the message. Do not, and try not to deviate, and make sure your staff know what is the message the company is sending out. Be clear on what that message is, whether it's to do with how the company is going to operate over the next few weeks, the next few months, or just during the peak of this crisis. But everyone needs to be on the same page, and everyone needs to know. And we will be reinforcing that message using lots and lots of different formats. One other thing, in this country, and depending on your company, we use so many different ways of communicating, whether somebody comes in and we give them a firm business handshake, do we hug them, do we kiss? Think about those things. If you watched the Commonwealth ceremony, Prince Charles decided to do the Namaste sign, and no one wanted to hug, whereas Prince Harry, when he talked to Craig David, did the elbow thing about how are you going to communicate with people coming into your offices. Are you still going to be handshaking? And if not, that's fine, but make it clear. Make it clear what you're doing to staff as well. And you know, sometimes it's up to the individuals, because some of us aren't that concerned and generally will carry on handshaking, but making sure that we reinforce the need to wash our hands because it's not just about us, it's about protecting others. Now, outgoing communications. I've just told you about the need to keep using lots of different formats to get that communication out there. I've told you about writing a blog, writing things on your social media platform. Please, in this crisis, when we're rushing and we're keeping information up to date, which is changing frequently, what may happen is that there are small errors. Sometimes it's typing errors, sometimes it's just misunderstanding. But have someone who's almost acting in the form of an editor, but they're going to scrutinize your communications thoroughly. Make sure that there are no jargon. We use internal speak when we're talking to people who understand what's going on, and we use lots of acronyms. Try to avoid those things when you're trying to communicate, whether it be internally or externally. So keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible, and make sure that you just minimize that. Date stamp your communication, especially on the information hub. Make sure that you know what is the latest information, and you know that because it is date stamped. So you can see when it was updated, when it was posted. And again, as I say, repeat that message over and over again. And find someone who will monitor your incoming communications. Because sometimes, as I said, despite having the information on your hub or in your social media platform, there will be people who will be calling in. Get someone to monitor that. I think Matthew talked about a help desk and how you will monitor that help desk. People will be trying to communicate with you, and they'll be communicating with you through all sorts of mediums. So have someone who's responsible for monitoring incoming communications. And the other thing I would say finally is breathe. We're dealing with the coronavirus now because it's happening now, and it's changing very quickly, and the information is changing very quickly. But you're going to be in this potentially for the next few months. So take a deep breath, and as we say, this too will pass. So it's going to pass. Don't panic. Don't make major changes that's going to impact on your company strategy for communications. The other thing I failed to mention in terms of both internal and external is have on your platform, on your information hub, links to the most respected sites, whether that be government sites that give up-to-date information, or whether it be the World Health Organization site, or whether it be just have links to sites what you trust. Monitor the news, monitor respected news, and be very careful of what's coming through to you on Twitter and social media, because sometimes these things happen constantly. And actually what happened is that you will be responding to some things that it's not necessary for you to respond to. And also you may be reacting to news that are fake. And so be careful of the communications that you're absorbing from external sources, and just be wary that lots and lots of things are floating around now that really are not worthwhile wasting your time on dealing with. I'm going to stop there because of the time, and deal with any Q&As.
Okay, thank you very much, Savadne. We're glad we got you on in the end. So we've had a couple of questions. I'm actually going to merge two of them. First off, Mac asks, should businesses carry on with normal and planned marketing and PR campaigns during the crisis? And I'm going to merge it with a question from Adam, who asks, do you think that there is a danger that too much comms could have a negative effect on the business? So is there a sense that if you do carry on with any planned campaigns that you've scheduled, that it could become too much information, whether it's about coronavirus or the business and its products and services, and that in turn kind of has a negative impact on the business? I think
let me pick up on, both of those are the same, but It depends on what that marketing campaign you had planned is, because what you don't want to appear to be is being insensitive. You can, I see somebody said about capitalizing on it for positive. I would be very, I'd have to really check on the wording that you're using, because people do not want to see anyone capitalizing on something that's potentially a crisis already that is taking lives. So I think you need to be very careful. You need to double check on any planned marketing campaigns that you have to make sure that it is sensitive, but also doesn't appear to be that you're just using the opportunity to sell your brand and your company. So I would be I'd double check whatever marketing, PR you had planned, campaign strategy, that you've got in the pipeline, to see how that translates in the current climate. But some of us, you can use it. We're a PR company, and this is an opportunity for us to talk about crisis planning, because it's a crisis that's happening, and it's enabled us to be able to talk about companies planning for crisis. So I think you just need to be careful of how you're using it for PR and marketing for your own brand.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, I think
Max
that
and Adam?
Yeah, I think that covers all three questions there for you, Avadne. So thank you very much, and we will do our best. Hopefully, we have Tracy back now, so we'll give one last try to get Tracy back. So I will introduce Tracy Hudson, Executive Director of the HR Department.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to start off by saying that the information I'm giving you is up to date as of today. So with the 12th of March, this information also incorporates everything that we received from the budget yesterday. But if you're listening to this in a few days or weeks' time, I'd suggest you contact me directly if you've got any questions. You're very welcome to do that. At the HR department, we work with small businesses across the country and across all industries, and many are struggling at the moment. So we thought it would be helpful to talk through some of the frequently asked questions that we're getting here. We have a lot of what-if questions. So what if I think an employee isn't genuinely required to self-isolate? As most of you will know, if people are traveling back from high-risk areas, they must self-isolate if they're not in quarantine. Now, for the majority of people, this is a huge disruption, a massive hassle. They'd rather just be getting back to work, getting on with their lives. But we have received queries from employers who are suggesting that an employee just wants time off and the self-isolation isn't genuine. So our advice a couple of days ago was that you need to trust what your employee is telling you, because they couldn't get any medical evidence like a fit note, and they can self-certify for the first 7 days anyway. Since the budget yesterday, we now know that employees will be able to obtain some sort of fitness certificate declaring the requirement to self-isolate when they call the NHS 111 helpline. So you can request employees do this in future. If you have any evidence that an employee has done anything fraudulently to obtain time off or to obtain sick pay, then you might be able to take disciplinary action, but you need to contact your local HR department office for advice on those particular situations. So the next question is, what if my employees are worried about their colleagues not being hygienic? I think this is probably the most common question that we're getting at the moment, that people are, they're observing other people going and not washing their hands or walking past a hand sanitizer and not using it, and it is such a worry for people. All you can do as an employer is encourage your employees to maintain good hygiene. You can't stand over them and make sure they wash their hands thoroughly and sing happy birthday twice or any other guidelines that you've got. So you can provide hand sanitizers, the normal advice, plenty of tissues, empty the bins regularly, but you can't force people to be hygienic. What if an employee wants to cancel their holiday? So maybe an employee's holiday gets cancelled by the travel operator, or maybe they just don't want to go because they're nervous. So they can submit a request to you to cancel their annual leave so that they can take it obviously later on in the year. As an employer, you don't have to accept a cancellation of annual leave. You can do what suits the business best, so you need to just take that call on a case-by-case basis. But what if I want an employee to cancel their holiday? So this might be because you've just got too much work going on at the moment and you need all hands on deck with the healthy people. As long as you provide notice equivalent to the period of leave, then you can do this. But I would just encourage you to consider the impact that this might have on the individual financially if they've got to lose out on a holiday abroad, also the impact on their family or their partner or their friends, whoever they're travelling with. So it would be worth talking to employees before you take such a step. So the next question is, what happens if we can't deliver work to clients because we don't have enough staff? The problems we're seeing are employees self-isolating, they're on leave anyway, they're in quarantine, they may be taking time off to care for others who are feeling unwell, or just people who are nervous about attending work right now. Our advice is to have open conversations with these staff and understand what their issues are, and maybe think about how they or you can work differently so you can still deliver what you need to. Consider working from home. If they've got laptops, phones, if documents can be delivered to people, can they carry on working from home? Maybe people who are struggling with dependence might be able to work at different times. For example, when their partner comes home, then maybe they can pick up and start doing some work in the evenings. But also talk to your clients. We're all in the same boat here. And actually, the deadlines they first gave you might not apply now anyway, so it's worth just talking to your clients too. What if my employees are asked to work from home, but I don't want them to? There's no obligation on you as an employer to allow people to work from home, but it's worth considering why they're asking, and discuss ways to work differently, as I've just discussed for the previous question. Some companies we've been speaking to who have previously not allowed working from home are actually really enjoying it as a trial to see how it works, and they're considering embracing it in the future. So I encourage you to see it as an opportunity, really, to test how these things work. A common question that we also get is, what if I can't afford to keep all my employees because we've lost so much work? So there are a few options here. You could consider layoffs. So this is not redundancy. This is where you lay staff off for a short period of time because you can see that work will come in the foreseeable future, but you're not paying them. They are entitled to a statutory guarantee payment each day that they're not working, but it's not their full pay at all. But there are some technicalities around this. You must have a layoff clause in your contracts of employment, so it's important that you get advice on this before jumping into that one. You could offer staff unpaid leave, particularly with talk at the moment of schools potentially closing. Some parents might jump at the chance to take some unpaid leave and have that pressure taken off them. You can force employees to take holidays. So that might not help cash flow wise, but if you haven't got much work on, then it could mean that you get employees to take their holidays now rather than later on in the year when the work comes back in. You have to give double the notice than the required period of leave. So if you want somebody to take a week off, you need to give them 2 weeks notice of that. You could consult with your teams about reducing their working hours temporarily, or the number of days that they're working for a short period of time. This one's going to make me sound harsh, but you could let short-serving staff go. So those with under 2 years service are not entitled to redundancy pay. They have limited employment rights. They do have some in terms of discrimination, but that could be an option for you. And of course, there's always the option of redundancy. But having spoken to quite a few of our clients recently, they're concerned about the impact of these redundancy payouts that they will have to make, because that's going to be a hit on the cash flow as well. I'd suggest with all of the above, it's important you get HR advice before you act on any of these, because there are legalities around all of them, but they are things that are relatively simple and straightforward to do. So just moving on to the next slide, these are questions around pay. Do I have to pay an employee who chooses to self-isolate without medical advice? The answer is no, you don't, because they're choosing to self-isolate. It's not necessary. They should phone 111 for advice, though. If there is genuinely no need for them to self-isolate, but they just don't want to work because they're nervous, then potentially you could discipline them for failing to attend work. But hopefully just getting them to phone 111 might reassure them. And if an employee is instructed to self-isolate or is in quarantine, then they are entitled to receive statutory sick pay. Most of you will have heard from the budget yesterday that employers with less than 250 employees can claim back their statutory sick pay from the government. Statutory sick pay is currently £94.25 a week, and you'll be able to reclaim a maximum of 2 weeks statutory sick pay, but we don't know exactly when that comes into effect. We haven't had any communication on that yet. If an employee has no symptoms but you don't want them to work, then you would need to, if the employee has symptoms but you don't want them to work, then you would have to pay full pay to that individual if you're sending them home because you don't want them to work. If the employee has obvious symptoms but they're still attending work, then again, the advice is that you phone 111 for advice, and the employee must follow that advice. So if the advisor on the phone is saying that they must self-isolate, they must do that, and you can pay them statutory sick pay. If they don't follow that advice, then you can potentially discipline them for breaching the health and safety of their colleagues. So, but again, you should get proper HR advice on that. But if they're allowed to work, you must let them do it, and if you insist that they stay off, then you need to pay them in full. So those are all the questions that I wanted to cover off today. If you want any further advice, you're very welcome to get in touch with me, or I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Tracy. We're glad to have got you on eventually. So we've had a couple of questions that I'll go through now. So we've got one from Pauline who says, if people are enforced into self-isolation or quarantine, is it right that this is classed as absence as opposed to special leave or extenuating circumstances?
Yes, you should treat that as sickness absence, yes, and they're entitled to statutory sick pay.
Okay, and one that I've just thought of is, do you think this situation is likely to see a lot of HR departments almost become a little bit more relaxed with certain policies because it is such an unprecedented situation?
Yeah, I think from a health and safety point of view, you've got to be really strict, much stricter, but certainly with policies around working from home, policies around absence, policies around time off for dependents, we're going to have a huge challenge in this country if this COBRA meeting finishes this afternoon and Boris decides that he's going to close the schools, because we're going to have grandparents who might be keeping themselves away because they're vulnerable, so they can't look after the grandchildren. Parents who are trying to work, what do? We're kind of running out of childcare options. No nurseries or childminders are going to be taking children in. So, yeah, we do have to take a pragmatic view, really, on how we're going to keep businesses running successfully over the next few weeks and months.
Okay, and one final one, which kind of leads on for something that you mentioned there, and you mentioned during your talk about businesses using this as a bit of a trial period for remote working and home working who haven't necessarily done it before. Do you think that this outbreak could lead to a bit of a revolution on remote working and home working? That's a question from Mac.
Yeah, I really think it will. I mean, we've been talking to actually quite a few traditional businesses who, you come to the office, you work your 9 to 5, you have your hour lunch break and you go. And these people are now starting to work from home purely because of what's going on at the moment. And the business owners are saying, you know what, this isn't a bad idea. They're reducing their commute. One company we've talked to has already said that they might start getting rid of traditional desks and having hot desks for those days that people want to come into work. So, yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to test the water, really.
Okay, brilliant. I think we'll finish there. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and to our speakers, Matthew, Simon, Tracy, and Avadne. As I mentioned at the start, we have recorded today's webinar, and we'll be distributing that to everyone who attended today's webinar, so you can catch up on any information that you missed out on or need to check back over. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll be sure to share as much information and advice as we can about what small businesses can do about this threat over the coming weeks. Thank you very much. Goodbye.